The sun had barely risen when our team of 8 Navy SEALs moved silently through the rugged, rocky terrain of the valley. The mission was supposed to be simple: infiltrate a remote enemy compound, gather intel, and exfiltrate before nightfall. Intelligence suggested there were no more than a dozen enemy fighters stationed in the area, a number we could handle with precision and stealth. But deep down, I had a gnawing feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. The silence was too perfect, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes your instincts scream. As we advanced, the team leader, Commander Hayes, raised his fist, signaling us to halt. We crouched low, our weapons at the ready, scanning the ridges that flanked us on both sides. I could feel my heart pounding inside my chest, every breath controlled and shallow. Hayes looked back at us, his expression unreadable beneath the streaks of camouflage paint on his face. "We're close," he mouthed, barely audible. We nodded in unison and continued forward, weaving through the jagged rocks like shadows. The compound came into view, a cluster of dilapidated mud brick structures nestled between two towering cliffs. From a distance, it looked abandoned, no movement, no sentries. It should have been a red flag, but with the mission clock ticking, we didn't have the luxury to second-guess. Hayes gave silent hand signals, splitting the team into 2 fire teams. My group would cover the perimeter while his group breached the main building. We moved into position swiftly, every step rehearsed and precise. I took up position behind a boulder, my rifle steady as I scanned the horizon through my scope. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal on the ridge to the east. My blood turned cold. "Contact 3 o'clock, high ground." I hissed into my comms, but before anyone could react, the valley exploded with gunfire. Bullets rained down from the ridges on both sides, the deafening roar of machine guns echoing through the canyon. Dirt and rock erupted around us as we scrambled for cover. The so-called empty compound had been a trap from the start. I ducked behind the boulder as rounds cracked past my head, my ears ringing from the sheer volume of fire. "Ambush, fall back, find cover," Hayes shouted over the comms, his voice cutting through the chaos. I peeked out just long enough to return fire, dropping 1 hostile on the ridge, but for every enemy I hit, 3 more seemed to take their place. The enemy fighters were well coordinated, their fire disciplined and relentless. They had us surrounded, pinning us down in a deadly crossfire. My teammates were shouting over the comms, calling out positions and casualties. "Murphy's hit," someone yelled. I risked a glance and saw our medic dragging Murphy behind cover, blood soaking his sleeve. My stomach twisted, but there was no time to dwell. My rifle's magazine ran dry, and I slammed in a fresh one with shaking hands, barely noticing the sweat stinging my eyes. The sheer volume of enemies made it clear this was no ordinary militia group. These guys were trained, well-armed, and prepared for us. Hayes crawled over to me, his face grim. "We're boxed in," he growled, his voice low but steady. "We need to break their line before they close the noose." I nodded, trying to mask the fear clawing at my insides. "How many do you think?" I asked. Hayes peeked over the rock, counted for a brief second, then ducked back down. "Too many. At least 30 on the ridges, maybe more coming from the compound. They knew we'd be here." His words hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't just a bad stroke of luck. We'd been betrayed. Someone had fed them our mission details. The gunfire never let up, and I could feel my ammo dwindling. My team was firing in controlled bursts, conserving every round, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a bucket. I checked my pouches, 2 magazines left. That was it. Fear crept into my thoughts, but I shoved it aside. Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. "We need air support," I shouted over the comms. Hayes shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "No go. Too deep in the canyon. Comms are patchy as it is. Closest extraction point is 3 clicks west, but we won't make it unless we punch through." The enemy began to advance, their silhouettes moving down the ridges like a tide of shadows. They were closing in, tightening the trap. I lined up a shot and dropped one, then another, but my magazine clicked empty again. As I reloaded, I realized I only had 1 mag left. My hands trembled as I slammed it in, the horrifying truth sinking in. We were running out of ammo fast, and the enemy wasn't slowing down. "Last mag," I yelled, my voice raw with desperation. Around me, my teammates were shouting similar warnings. The situation was going from bad to catastrophic. Hayes crawled back to our position, his own rifle running low. He looked at me, his eyes burning with determination despite the chaos. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "We're not dying here. You hold this flank. If they overrun us, we're done." I nodded, my throat dry. He glanced at my rifle, then at the dwindling ammo pouch at my side. Without hesitation, he ripped his own M4 from his shoulder and shoved it toward me. "Take it. I got my sidearm. You're the best shot we've got, don't let them through." For a moment time seemed to slow. The weight of the weapon in my hands felt like a lifeline, a spark of hope amid the storm of bullets. I met Hayes' gaze and saw the unspoken trust there, the bond forged through countless missions and near-death experiences. "You better not die on me," I muttered, forcing a grim smile. Hayes smirked, though his eyes betrayed the gravity of the situation. "Same to you. Now move." With renewed determination, I rose from behind the rock just enough to fire, unleashing a barrage of accurate, deadly shots. Enemy fighters dropped one by one, their advance momentarily halted. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and came at us again. The valley was a hellscape of smoke, blood, and fire, the air thick with the metallic stench of spent rounds and fear. My heart pounded like a war drum, but my focus narrowed to a razor's edge. If we were going to make it out alive, we had to hold this position, no matter the cost. The enemy fighters regrouped quickly, their shouting echoing through the narrow canyon as they pressed their advantage. I kept firing Hayes' M4, each pull of the trigger precise and controlled, but even as I dropped one hostile after another, they kept coming, relentless like a tide of darkness. My pulse thundered in my ears, sweat stinging my eyes, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to miss. Every shot counted because every missed bullet meant one of my brothers could die. The rest of my team was pinned down behind scattered rocks and fragments of crumbling walls, returning fire whenever they could, but we were clearly outnumbered and outgunned. The ridges gave the enemy a perfect elevated position, and they were exploiting it with ruthless efficiency. Hayes was moving between positions, rallying the team, his pistol barking sharply as he fired at shadows darting between the rocks. I could see in his movements that he was calculating, thinking 3 steps ahead even under this rain of bullets. That gave me strength. If Hayes believed we could survive this, then so did I. My last magazine in my original rifle was gone, and the M4 Hayes gave me was burning through its ammo at an alarming rate. I could feel the heat radiating from the barrel every time I reloaded. Then, out of nowhere, an RPG whooshed from the ridge and slammed into a boulder near our position, the explosion throwing me backward and filling the air with choking dust and flying shrapnel. My ears rang so loudly I couldn't hear my own voice as I screamed, scrambling to check my body for injuries. By some miracle I was intact, but the shock wave had rattled me. Hayes grabbed my arm, hauling me back to my feet. "You good?" he shouted, his voice barely audible through the ringing in my ears. I nodded, forcing my brain to focus. "They've got RPGs now," I said, my voice hoarse. His jaw tightened. "We need to move before they collapse this whole valley on us." But moving was easier said than done. Every exit was covered by machine gun fire, and the only path out was a narrow western pass where the enemy was pouring in reinforcements. Our only chance was to hold until we could create some kind of diversion, but that meant burning through what little ammo we had left. I glanced at my remaining magazines, 2 partials and a half-empty sidearm clip. My throat went dry. Around me I could hear my teammates shouting similar warnings over the comms. "Out of ammo here. 2 mags left. Make every shot count." The desperation in their voices was a reflection of what I felt deep inside. Through the dust and chaos, I saw movement on the ridge, several enemy fighters flanking to the left, trying to circle behind us. "Flank left. 10 o'clock. I yelled, pivoting and firing a rapid burst that dropped the lead fighter. The others dove for cover, but not before I cut another one down. My shots bought us precious seconds, but they kept pushing, their strategy clearly to overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Hayes crawled beside me, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice deadly calm. "If they box us in completely, we're done. We need to push through the West Pass." I glanced at the narrow exit, currently a hailstorm of tracer rounds and muzzle flashes. "That's suicide," I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay strong. Hayes locked eyes with me, his expression unflinching. "Staying here is suicide. Moving is our only chance. I'll take point. You cover me." Before I could argue, he was already moving, sprinting from cover to cover with fearless precision. I gritted my teeth, leaning over the rock to lay down suppressing fire. The M4 roared in my hands, my shots stitching through the darkness as Hayes reached a larger boulder near the pass. He motioned for the others to follow. One by one, the team broke cover and moved, each sprint a gamble between life and death. I was the last to move, heart hammering as I ran full tilt, bullets snapping past my head. I dove behind the boulder beside Hayes, landing hard on my stomach. My lungs burned, but we'd made it for now. The enemy wasn't about to let us go so easily. As soon as they realized we were moving toward the West Pass, they intensified their fire, sending another RPG screaming toward us. The rocket hit short, but the explosion sent fragments of stone slicing through the air. I felt a sharp sting in my thigh and looked down to see blood soaking through my pants. It wasn't deep, but the pain flared hot and sharp. Hayes saw it immediately. "You're hit," he barked. "I'm fine," I grunted, forcing myself to stand. "We don't have time for this." As we regrouped, the grim reality set in. We were dangerously low on ammo, and the enemy was still flooding the battlefield. Hayes glanced at the team, his expression grave. "We've got one shot at this," he said. "We punch through the pass, link up with extraction and call in an airstrike to wipe this place off the map. If we fail, nobody goes home." His words lit a fire in us, burning away the fear and exhaustion. This was it. We either fought our way out or died here. The enemy made their next move, charging down the ridges in a coordinated assault. The valley filled with their war cries and the roar of automatic fire. I braced against the boulder, aiming carefully with my dwindling rounds. Each trigger pull felt like a prayer, every shot striking true. The fighters dropped, but more surged forward to take their place. My M4 clicked empty again, and I ripped the last magazine from my pouch, slamming it home with shaking hands. "Last mag," I yelled, my voice hoarse. Around me, similar cries echoed as my teammates reached their final rounds. Hayes checked his pistol. Only a handful of bullets left. The final push came like a tidal wave. The enemy swarmed us, bullets cracking against our cover, grenades exploding dangerously close. Smoke filled the air, blinding and suffocating. My ears rang with the cacophony of war, but my focus remained razor-sharp. Hayes grabbed my shoulder, shouting over the din, "When I say go, you unleash hell. Don't stop until we're through." I nodded, teeth clenched, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He gave the signal and we moved as one. I rose from cover and fired with everything I had, each shot dropping a target as we surged forward. My teammates followed, their rifles blazing despite the dwindling ammo. The enemy reeled under the sudden, furious assault, but they weren't broken yet. Hayes was in the lead, moving with the speed and precision of a man possessed. We fought through a hail of bullets, our boots pounding the rocky ground as we carved a path toward the pass. I could feel my strength fading, every muscle screaming, but I refused to stop. The exit was so close, just a few dozen yards ahead, but the enemy was throwing everything they had at us. My last round fired, and the M4 went silent. I drew my sidearm without hesitation, continuing to shoot even as the barrel overheated. Behind me, I heard one of my teammates scream in pain, but there was no time to look back. Hayes turned briefly, his face a mask of fury and determination. "We're almost there. Don't stop." The final yards were a blur of blood and smoke. I tackled an enemy fighter who lunged at me, driving my knife into his chest before pushing forward again. Hayes was the first through the pass, turning to cover us as we spilled out of the canyon, battered and bleeding but alive. We collapsed behind a cluster of rocks, gasping for breath. The enemy was regrouping behind us, their shouts growing louder. Hayes grabbed the radio from his vest, static crackling as he shouted coordinates. "This is Sabre Actual. Immediate air support. Danger close." The sky above rumbled as distant rotors approached, but I knew we weren't safe yet. The enemy was closing in fast and we had almost no ammo left. I looked at Hayes, who met my gaze with grim resolve. "It's not over," he said, reloading his pistol with his last bullets. "Get ready. We fight until the birds arrive, or we die right here." My chest tightened with fear and determination. I gripped my sidearm, blood dripping from my fingers, and took a deep breath as the enemy shadows emerged from the smoke, ready to finish what they started. The thunder of rotor blades was still faint in the distance, a fragile promise of salvation that seemed so far away as the enemy closed in like a relentless storm. My chest heaved with ragged breaths, lungs burning from smoke and exhaustion, every muscle trembling from the sheer physical toll of the fight. We had barely broken through the pass, and though the narrow exit gave us a momentary advantage, it also made us a choke point. Hayes crouched beside me, his pistol gripped tightly in his hand, eyes scanning the swirling dust and smoke for movement. "They're coming," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. His calmness always amazed me. Even surrounded and outnumbered, he was a rock we could cling to. I checked my sidearm, counting the rounds left. Just 5. My rifle was useless now, the M4's barrel scorched and its magazine well empty. Around me, my teammates were in similar states, bloodied, battered, and nearly dry on ammo. We were SEALs trained for worst-case scenarios, but this felt like the edge of the abyss. The first wave came suddenly, enemy fighters pouring through the smoke with wild war cries and blazing rifles. It felt like the world erupted all at once, muzzle flashes lighting up the haze like demonic fireflies. I snapped my pistol up and fired, every shot aimed with surgical precision. One hostile fell, then another, but there were too many. Hayes shouted commands, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Hold the line. Don't let them through. We formed a rough semicircle, using the rocks as cover, and unleashed what little firepower we had left. Spent casings clattered around my feet as I emptied my magazine, then fumbled for the last clip on my belt. My hands shook, slick with sweat and blood, but I forced myself to stay steady. Missing wasn't an option. Each bullet had to count. They kept pushing, climbing over their fallen, utterly fearless. An enemy fighter lunged at me from the left, his rifle raised like a club. I sidestepped at the last second, driving my knife into his side and twisting hard. His scream was drowned out by the battle around us as I shoved him away and grabbed his rifle before it hit the ground. It was an old, battered AK, but it had a half-full magazine, better than nothing. I didn't think. I just raised it and fired, mowing down the next two enemies charging at our position. The recoil was harsh, the weapon foreign in my hands, but survival didn't care about comfort. To my right, Murphy, our wounded teammate, was propped against a rock, pale and sweating but still firing his pistol with grim determination. Blood soaked his bandages, but he refused to quit. Next to him, Carter was down to his last grenade. Incoming, he yelled, lobbing it into the densest cluster of hostiles. The explosion ripped through them, buying us a few precious seconds. The blast wave knocked several more fighters back, their screams mingling with the ringing in my ears. But for every enemy we dropped, two more seemed to take their place. It was like fighting a hydra. You cut one head off and two more grew in its place. Ace knew it too. His face was set in a grim mask as he barked into the radio. Saber actual to any unit in range. We are danger close and need immediate support. Coordinates incoming. Static hissed back at him, the connection weak in the canyon's depths. Finally, a distorted voice responded. Saber actual, this is Eagle 2-1. We copy. ETA 8 minutes. Hold your position. 8 minutes. It might as well have been 8 hours. I locked eyes with Hayes, reading the unspoken message there. We weren't going to last that long unless we did something drastic. The enemy began to shift tactics, spreading out and trying to encircle us again. Hayes spotted it instantly. They're flanking right. Jax Carter, cut them off, he ordered. I didn't hesitate. Gripping the stolen AK tightly, I sprinted to a new position with Carter covering me. Bullets snapped past my head, one grazing my shoulder and spinning me halfway around, but I kept moving. We dropped behind a rock outcropping just in time to see a group of fighters sneaking along the ridge, trying to get behind our line. Not today, I growled, popping up to fire a controlled burst. 3 went down instantly and Carter picked off the rest with ruthless efficiency. For a moment, the flank was secure, but the main force was still pounding our position. Back at the center, Hayes was a whirlwind of controlled violence. His pistol was empty now, so he'd switched to a fallen enemy's weapon, firing with deadly precision. His voice was hoarse from shouting commands, but he never stopped. He moved between us, checking on each man, giving orders, keeping us focused. Without him, we would have fallen apart long ago. 5 minutes, he yelled after checking the radio again. Just hold for 5 more minutes. His words ignited a spark in me, a tiny ember of hope amid the darkness. 5 minutes wasn't impossible. We'd faced worse before. We just had to survive. The enemy seemed to sense our desperation. They charged again, a full-on rush meant to break us once and for all. I rose from cover, the AK roaring as I emptied the last of its magazine into their ranks. The recoil bruised my shoulder, but I didn't care. Around me, my teammates did the same, every man firing until his weapon clicked empty. When my rifle went dry, I drew my knife again, ready for the inevitable close-quarters fight. The first enemy reached me, swinging a machete, but I parried and drove my blade into his throat, spinning to kick another fighter back. Blood sprayed, mingling with the dust and smoke, turning the battlefield into a nightmarish haze. Carter went down with a cry, a bullet tearing through his leg. I grabbed him under the arms and dragged him back behind cover, firing wildly with my free hand to keep the enemy at bay. Hayes appeared beside me, covering us as we retreated. Stay with me, Carter. Hayes barked, his voice fierce. Carter gritted his teeth, nodding even as pain twisted his features. Murphy, despite his own wounds, helped apply a tourniquet while still firing his pistol one-handed. The sheer grit of my team filled me with pride and fury. We weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore, we were fighting for each other. Then, over the chaos, I heard it, the distinct thump-thump-thump of helicopter rotors, louder now, closer. I dared to glance up and saw a silhouette cutting through the smoke, a Black Hawk followed by 2 gunships. My heart surged. Birds inbound. I screamed, my voice breaking with relief. The enemy faltered for just a moment, glancing skyward in confusion, and that was all we needed. Hayes seized the opportunity. Push forward. Give them a clear target, he roared. We charged, a final desperate surge fueled by adrenaline and rage. I grabbed another fallen rifle on the run and opened fire, cutting down the nearest enemies. Hayes led from the front, shouting coordinates into the radio as the gunships lined up their attack run. Tracer rounds rained down from above, shredding the enemy ranks in a storm of fire and metal. The ground shook as rockets slammed into the ridges, turning enemy positions into plumes of smoke and flame. The survivors broke, scattering like frightened animals, their war cries replaced by screams of terror. Even then we didn't stop. We kept moving, clearing the area, making sure no stragglers could regroup and hit us from behind. When the last hostile fell silent, we collapsed in a ragged circle, gasping for air. Blood soaked our uniforms, smoke stung our eyes, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. Hayes stood tall amid the wreckage, his chest heaving but his eyes fierce. "We're not done," he said, voice rough. "Extraction is 2 minutes out. Stay sharp." I looked around at my brothers, battered but unbroken, and felt a swell of emotion so strong it nearly knocked me over. We had survived the impossible but at a terrible cost. Carter and Murphy were barely conscious, their lives hanging by a thread. Ammo was gone, weapons battered, bodies broken. And yet, somehow we were still here. I tightened my grip on the rifle and met Hayes' gaze. "We made it this far," I said, my voice raw. "Let's make sure it wasn't for nothing." Hayes nodded, his expression grim. "We will. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." As the helicopters descended and the dust swirled around us, I knew he was right. Today we had won a battle. But the war, the shadow war we fought in places no one would ever know about, was far from finished. And as long as we drew breath, we would fight it, no matter the odds. The roar of the gunships was deafening as they circled above, laying down suppressive fire on the retreating enemy. Dust and smoke churned around us, turning the battlefield into a swirling maelstrom of chaos and destruction. I could feel the vibration of the rotors through my boots, the deep thrum reverberating in my chest like a war drum. Hayes was shouting into the radio, coordinating with the pilots, while the rest of us huddled in a tight defensive formation, our weapons raised despite the near-total lack of ammunition. The Black Hawk was descending fast, its side gunners spraying fire at any enemy movement near the canyon mouth. I glanced back and saw Murphy and Carter lying side by side, barely conscious, their faces pale beneath streaks of blood and grime. Our medic, Daniels, worked frantically to stabilize them, his hands steady despite the chaos. Every second felt like an eternity, and I knew if we didn't get them on that bird soon, they wouldn't make it out alive. The enemy wasn't giving up without a fight. Even with the helicopters raining hell from above, scattered groups of fighters were regrouping, using the jagged rocks for cover as they launched desperate final attacks. Bullets pinged off the stone around us, and one of the side gunners aboard the Black Hawk let out a yell as he was struck in the arm. Hayes cursed, then turned to me, his face set with fierce determination. "We can't hold this position much longer," he shouted over the din. "We move now. Jax, you're on point. Daniels, get Murphy and Carter ready to move. Everyone else, cover their six." I nodded, my throat dry, and grabbed a battered enemy rifle I'd scavenged earlier. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "Move, move, move." Hayes roared, and we surged forward as one, sprinting toward the landing zone through a storm of bullets and smoke. My legs felt like lead, every step fueled by sheer willpower. I fired short, controlled bursts at any silhouette that moved, my vision narrowing to a tunnel of survival instinct. Behind me, I could hear Daniels grunting as he dragged Murphy and Carter on improvised stretchers, while Hayes and the others fired over his head to keep the enemy at bay. A grenade exploded to our left, the shock wave slamming into me like a physical blow and sending shards of rock slicing through the air. I stumbled, ears ringing, but Hayes was there instantly, hauling me upright with a fierce grip. "Stay with me, Jax," he bellowed. The Black Hawk loomed ahead, its side door open and a crew chief waving frantically for us to hurry. We were so close, but the enemy was throwing everything they had at us now, a final, frenzied attempt to annihilate us before we could escape. A burst of machine gun fire stitched the ground at my feet, and I dove behind a rock, returning fire until my last magazine clicked empty. Swearing, I hurled the empty rifle aside and drew my knife, the cold steel a pitiful comfort against the storm of lead around us. Hayes saw me and without hesitation tossed me another enemy rifle he'd scavenged. "Don't you dare quit on me," he shouted. With renewed determination, I surged forward again, laying down cover fire as Daniels and the wounded men reached the helicopter. The crew chief and another soldier grabbed Murphy and Carter, hauling them aboard as the medic leapt in after them. Hayes and I were the last ones out, our boots pounding the rocky ground as we sprinted toward the bird. The enemy was so close now I could see their faces through the smoke, wild-eyed, bloodied, screaming with rage. One of them raised an RPG and my heart froze. "RPG!" I screamed, diving to the side as Hayes tackled me to the ground. The rocket whooshed past, striking a boulder near the helicopter and detonating in a blinding fireball. Shrapnel tore through the air, slicing into my arm and back. Pain flared white-hot, but I forced myself to move, rolling onto my stomach and returning fire with gritted teeth. Hayes was already up, firing with deadly precision. "Go. Get on the bird," he yelled, shoving me toward the Black Hawk. I hesitated, unwilling to leave him behind, but his glare brooked no argument. "That's an order, Jax." Reluctantly, I scrambled aboard, turning to cover him as he backed toward the helicopter, firing non-stop. The moment his boots hit the deck, the pilot lifted off, the rotors blasting a hurricane of dust and debris across the battlefield. As we rose into the air, the enemy surged forward in a futile attempt to grab hold of the skids, but the door gunners cut them down mercilessly. The canyon fell away beneath us, a smoking ruin littered with bodies and wreckage. For the first time since the ambush began, I allowed myself to breathe. My chest heaved, lungs gulping in the acrid, smoky air, my entire body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Hayes slumped against the side of the cabin, his face streaked with blood and grime but his eyes still burning with fierce determination. Across from me, Daniels was working desperately to keep Murphy and Carter alive, barking orders to the crew chief as he applied pressure to their wounds. "Stay with me, damn it!" Daniels snarled, his voice breaking. "Don't you quit on me now." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sabre team, we're clear of the canyon but we've got hostiles tracking us on the ground. ETA to extraction base is 10 minutes. Hold on tight." Hayes grabbed the intercom mic. "Copy that. Keep us low and fast." He turned to me, his face grim. "We're not out of the woods yet, Jax. If they've got surface-to-air missiles, this ride could get real interesting." My stomach clenched at the thought, but I forced myself to focus on reloading the scavenged rifle. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to slam the magazine home. As we sped over the rugged terrain, tracer fire began to streak up from the ground, glowing arcs of death that forced the pilot to weave and dive to avoid them. The helicopter bucked and swayed, throwing us around like rag dolls. I gripped a handhold with one hand and fired out the open door with the other, my shots cutting down a few of the enemy shooters below. It felt futile, like trying to hold back a flood with a bucket, but every second we bought kept the enemy from lining up a perfect shot. The door gunners joined in, their heavy machine guns roaring as they rained steel down on the fighters below. Then, just when it seemed like we might actually make it, a plume of smoke erupted from a distant ridge. "Missile launch!" the pilot screamed. My heart stopped as I saw the contrail streaking toward us. The pilot yanked the Black Hawk into a desperate evasive maneuver, the world tilting violently as we dropped like a stone. The missile whooshed past, missing us by mere feet, but the near miss sent a shockwave through the cabin. Daniels was thrown sideways, nearly losing his grip on Carter, but I caught him at the last second, dragging both men back to safety. Hayes cursed and fired wildly at the ridge, but the launcher was already gone, hidden among the rocks. "We can't take another hit like that," the pilot growled, sweat pouring down his face as he fought to stabilize the bird. Hayes slammed a fist against the bulkhead. "Then we take them out before they get another shot." He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "Jax, you're with me. We're going down there." My jaw dropped. "Are you insane? We barely made it out alive and now you want to go back." Hayes leaned in close, his voice low and fierce. "If they take down this bird, everyone dies. I'm not letting that happen." Before I could argue, he was already moving, grabbing a rope line and clipping it to his harness. My heart pounded as I followed suit, adrenaline surging like liquid fire through my veins. The pilot swung the Black Hawk low over the ridge, the rotors barely clearing the jagged rocks. "Go, go, go!" Hayes shouted, and we rappelled down into the chaos below, our boots hitting the ground hard. The enemy fighters were already regrouping, but this time we had the element of surprise. Hayes moved like a predator, swift and deadly, his rifle barking in rapid, precise bursts. I covered his flank, cutting down anyone who tried to get behind us. The smoke was thick, the air hot with the stench of burning fuel and blood. We advanced methodically, step by step, until we reached the launch site. There it was, a crude but deadly missile launcher already being reloaded by a pair of fighters. Hayes didn't hesitate. One clean shot dropped the loader, and I rushed forward to finish the job, kicking the launcher over and emptying the rest of my magazine into its mechanisms. The weapon exploded in a fireball, sending shrapnel and bodies flying. Hayes grabbed my arm, dragging me back as the blast wave rolled over us. "That's one threat down," he said, breathing hard. "But there could be more." The radio crackled to life in his ear. "Sabre team, this is Eagle 2-1. Area clear for now. Get back to the bird before they regroup." Hayes gave me a sharp nod, and we sprinted back to the hovering Black Hawk, leaping aboard just as the pilot began to ascend. As we lifted off, I looked back at the burning ridge, my chest heaving. We'd survived again, but barely. Hayes clapped a bloodied hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Jax," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." I nodded silently, staring out at the dark horizon, knowing that the real fight was still ahead. The Black Hawk surged through the night sky, banking hard as the pilot pushed the engines to their limit. The wind whipped through the open side doors, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and blood. My hands clenched tightly around the metal handholds, knuckles white as I tried to steady my breathing. My entire body trembled with adrenaline, exhaustion gnawing at my muscles, but I couldn't relax, not yet. Below us, the terrain blurred by, a twisted, broken landscape of jagged cliffs and winding valleys. Hayes crouched beside me, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes scanning the darkness below. Despite the chaos we just endured, his focus was razor-sharp. Murphy and Carter lay on the floor of the cabin, barely hanging on, their shallow breaths rattling beneath the thrum of the rotors. Daniels worked feverishly to keep them alive, sweat streaming down his face as he shouted for more bandages and saline. I wanted to believe we were finally safe, but deep down I knew better. The enemy had been too organized, too prepared. That ambush hadn't been random. Someone had fed them our mission details, and if they had surface-to-air missiles hidden out here, they weren't going to stop with just one failed shot. Ace seemed to be thinking the same thing. He leaned toward the pilot, shouting over the roar of the rotors. "Stay low and keep us zigzagging. If they've got another launcher, we can't give them a clean shot." The pilot gave a tight nod, his jaw clenched, hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled precision. I sat back, my mind replaying the battle over and over. The faces of the enemy fighters, the deafening roar of gunfire, the sight of Murphy screaming in pain as a bullet tore through his shoulder, it all looped endlessly in my head. I stared down at my hands, still streaked with dried blood, and wondered how many of it belonged to me and how much to the men I'd killed. There was no time to dwell on it. The only thing that mattered now was getting out alive and making sure whoever betrayed us paid dearly for it. Hayes caught my eye and gave a slight nod, a silent reminder to stay focused. The radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. "Sabre Actual, this is Eagle 2-1 Escort. We've got movement on your 6. 2 technicals moving fast, heavily armed." Ace snatched the radio. "Copy Eagle 2-1. Need a base?" Static filled the line for a moment before the response came. 7 minutes, but those trucks will be on you in 3. My heart sank. 7 minutes might as well have been an eternity with enemies closing in that fast. Hayes didn't flinch. "Gunners, lay down suppressive fire. Jax, get on the left door gun and keep those bastards off us." I scrambled to the mounted machine gun, my muscles screaming in protest. As I swung the weapon into position, I spotted the enemy vehicles barreling down a winding dirt road far below, their mounted guns blazing. Tracer rounds streaked up toward us, forcing the pilot to jink hard to the left. The sudden movement nearly threw me out of the bird, but I tightened my grip and returned fire. The heavy gun roared in my hands, the recoil vibrating through my entire body as I unleashed a storm of lead. The first truck swerved wildly as bullets tore through its engine block, then exploded in a fiery blast that lit up the night sky. The second truck veered to avoid the wreckage, its gunner firing wildly at us. I gritted my teeth and kept firing, my vision narrowing to the target. A final burst shredded the gunner and sent the truck careening off the road, flipping end over end before erupting into flames. "Targets neutralized," I shouted, my voice raw. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. From the corner of my eye, I saw another plume of smoke rising from a distant ridge, the telltale sign of a missile launch. "Missile incoming," the pilot screamed. The world tilted violently as the Black Hawk dropped into a gut-wrenching dive. The missile streaked past, close enough that I could feel the heat wash over my face. It detonated behind us with a thunderous boom, the shockwave buffeting the helicopter like a toy in a storm. Hayes barked into the radio, his voice like a whip. "Find that launcher and take it out now. Eagle 2-1, we need you on that ridge." The escort gunships peeled off, their powerful cannons lighting up the night as they strafed the ridge with withering fire. I watched through the haze as explosions ripped across the landscape, reducing the launcher and its crew to smoking craters. But the brief victory did little to ease the tension. Hayes crouched beside me, his face grim. "They're not supposed to have this kind of equipment," he growled. "Somebody's supplying them, and I want to know who." I nodded, my jaw tight. Whoever set us up knew exactly where we'd be and when. This wasn't just bad intel. It was betrayal. Hayes didn't respond, but the look in his eyes was enough. As the base came into view, a cluster of floodlit buildings surrounded by razor wire, I felt a flicker of hope. The pilot guided the Black Hawk down toward the landing pad, the escort birds circling overhead like angry hornets. The moment we touched down, medics and soldiers swarmed the helicopter, hauling Murphy and Carter onto stretchers and rushing them toward the infirmary. Daniels followed close behind, his face pale but determined. Hayes and I jumped out last, our boots hitting the tarmac hard. My legs nearly gave out from exhaustion, but Hayes' iron grip kept me upright. Inside the command tent, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Officers huddled around a large map table, their faces drawn and serious. The base commander, a grizzled colonel with sharp eyes, looked up as we entered. "Report," he barked. Hayes stepped forward, his voice steady despite the carnage we'd just endured. "Mission compromised. Enemy was waiting for us with superior numbers and heavy weapons. They had RPGs, technicals, and at least 2 surface-to-air missile launchers. We barely made it out." The colonel's face darkened. "Intel said there were a dozen fighters, maybe 15? Hayes' jaw tightened. "There were over 50, sir. Someone fed them our exact route and timetable." The room went silent. Betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. I felt my fists clench at my sides, rage boiling beneath my skin. Hayes turned to me, his voice low but firm. "Tell them what you saw." I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. They weren't just a local militia. Their weapons were too advanced, their tactics too coordinated. These guys had training. Real training. Murmurs rippled through the officers, but the colonel silenced them with a sharp gesture. "We'll get to the bottom of this. For now, you need rest and debriefing." Hayes didn't move. "With respect, sir, rest can wait. If they had this kind of setup ready for us, they're planning something bigger. We need to hit them before they regroup." The colonel studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "You'll get your chance, Commander. But first we need proof. I'll authorize recon flights at dawn." Hayes gave a curt nod, but I could see the barely contained fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. Later, in the barracks, the exhaustion finally hit me like a sledgehammer. I sat on my bunk, staring blankly at the floor, my hands still trembling. Around me, the survivors of our team lay in various states of pain and shock. Daniels sat nearby, head in his hands, while Hayes stood by the window, gazing out into the darkness. "You did good out there, Jax," he said quietly. I shook my head, my throat tight. "We lost too many, sir. And Murphy and Carter." My voice broke, but Hayes cut me off gently. "They're fighters. They'll pull through. What matters now is making sure this doesn't happen again." I looked up at him, seeing the fire in his eyes. "You think there's a mole?" I said, my voice low. Hayes didn't hesitate. "I know there is. And when we find them, there won't be a hole deep enough for them to hide in." His words sent a chill down my spine, but they also ignited a spark of determination. Whatever it took, we would uncover the traitor and bring them down. Before I could respond, an alarm blared through the base, harsh and urgent. Hayes stiffened, his hand automatically going to his weapon. "Incoming transmission," a voice shouted over the intercom. "Enemy forces mobilizing. Multiple convoys heading toward our position." My heart lurched. We'd barely escaped one slaughter, and now it looked like the war was coming straight to our doorstep. Hayes turned to me, his expression like steel. "Gear up, Jax. Round 2 is about to begin." The base erupted into chaos the moment the alarm blared, soldiers shouting orders over the blaring siren as boots pounded against the concrete floor. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an ominous glow while the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors started up outside. Hayes didn't waste a second. He barked orders with a voice that cut through the panic like a whip. Everyone to defensive positions. Jax, Daniels, grab heavy weapons and get to the south wall. I want a kill zone set up before those convoys arrive. My body moved before my mind caught up, adrenaline flooding my veins as I sprinted toward the armory. Daniels was right beside me, his face pale but determined, the loss of Murphy and Carter still fresh in both our minds. We burst into the armory, grabbing whatever we could carry, M240 machine guns, belts of ammunition, grenades and spare magazines. My hands moved with mechanical precision as I loaded up, the familiar weight of the gear grounding me amid the storm of fear and anticipation. Outside, floodlights snapped on one by one, illuminating the desert surrounding the base. From the southern ridge came the distant, unmistakable rumble of engines. They were coming and fast. By the time Daniels and I reached the south wall, other soldiers were already setting up sandbag barricades and positioning .50 caliber turrets. Hayes stood in the center, coordinating every move with sharp, clipped commands. He looked like a man born for chaos, his calm demeanor rallying everyone around him. Enemy convoy will hit the outer perimeter in less than 5 minutes, he shouted. Hold your fire until they're in range. Make every shot count. His eyes locked on mine and he gave a firm nod. Jax, you're on that M240. If they breach the gate, you cut them down. I dropped behind the mounted machine gun, adjusting the sights and checking the ammo belt one last time. The low, steady hum of the approaching engines grew louder, mingling with the pounding of my own heart. Through the night vision goggles, I caught glimpses of movement, dark shapes advancing across the desert, their headlights blacked out to stay hidden. But they couldn't hide the sound and they couldn't hide from what was waiting for them. The first explosion shattered the night as a mortar round slammed into the outer fence, sending debris flying. The enemy had opened the fight. Hayes didn't flinch. Return fire, he roared. The base lit up in an instant, tracer rounds streaking through the darkness like fiery comets. I squeezed the trigger, and the M240 roared to life, the heavy recoil vibrating through my arms as I laid down a hail of bullets. Enemy fighters fell, their silhouettes collapsing into the dirt, but still they came, relentless and organized. They moved with military precision, leapfrogging positions and returning fire with deadly accuracy. Daniel shouted over the chaos. These guys aren't just mercs. Look at their formation. He was right. This wasn't some ragtag militia. This was a trained force, well-funded and well-equipped. The realization chilled me to my core. Whoever had set us up wasn't just feeding intel to local fighters, they were backing a full-scale paramilitary operation. A technical truck roared into view, its mounted gun tearing into our defenses. Soldiers dove for cover as rounds ripped through the barricades. Jax, take it out, Hayes yelled. I swung the M240, unleashing a focused burst. The truck's engine block exploded in a shower of sparks and flames, sending the vehicle flipping end over end. The wreckage burned, casting flickering shadows across the battlefield. For a brief moment, it felt like we had the upper hand. Then the enemy brought out their heavy weapons. RPGs streaked through the air, slamming into the south wall and throwing soldiers like rag dolls. The ground trembled beneath the force of the blasts, and my ears rang as I was thrown to the ground. Dizzy and disoriented, I struggled back to my feet just in time to see the main gate buckle under the assault. The enemy was pouring through like a flood, their war cries mixing with the crack of gunfire. Hayes was everywhere at once, rallying defenders, tossing grenades, and cutting down enemies with ruthless efficiency. Fall back to the inner line, he bellowed. We hold them there or we die trying. I grabbed Daniels, who was clutching a bleeding arm, and dragged him toward the secondary barricade. Bullets tore past us, one grazing my shoulder and sending a searing pain through my body, but I gritted my teeth and kept moving. As we reached the inner defenses, Hayes appeared beside me, his face grim but unbroken. They want this base badly, he growled, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. Which means whatever they're after is inside these walls. We cannot let them take it. I didn't have to ask what he meant. The intel we'd gathered on our doomed mission, along with classified data about enemy operations, was stored in the command tent. If that fell into enemy hands, it would spell disaster for countless missions and lives. The fighting raged on, wave after wave of enemies crashing against our defenses. My world narrowed to the rhythm of shooting, reloading, and ducking for cover. Daniel stayed close, his wound hastily bandaged, his face set with grim determination. At one point, an enemy soldier charged through a gap in the line, his knife raised high. I barely had time to react, swinging my weapon like a club and smashing him to the ground before putting a round through his chest. There was no room for hesitation, no space for mercy. Just when it seemed like we might be overwhelmed, a new sound cut through the chaos, the high-pitched whine of incoming jets. Hayes grabbed his radio. Eagle 2-1, this is Sabre Actual. Confirm friendlies. A calm, clipped voice responded, copy Sabre Actual. Air support inbound. Danger close. Mark your position with IR strobes. Hayes turned to me. Jack's strobe light, now. I fumbled with my pack, pulling out the infrared marker and activating it. Seconds later, the night erupted into fire and thunder as the jets screamed overhead, unleashing hell on the enemy forces. Explosions lit up the desert, the shockwaves nearly knocking me off my feet. Enemy vehicles disintegrated under the barrage, their formations scattering in panic. The tide of battle shifted in an instant, and our defenders surged forward with renewed vigor. But Hayes wasn't celebrating yet. They'll regroup, he warned, his voice grim. This was just the first wave. And whoever is pulling the strings isn't going to stop until they've got what they came for. He turned to me, his eyes burning with fierce determination. Jax Daniels, you're with me. We need to secure the command tent and make sure that intel doesn't fall into enemy hands. If this base falls, we burn everything before they get it. We sprinted across the compound, weaving through the wreckage and wounded. The command tent loomed ahead, eerily intact amid the destruction. Inside, the base commander was frantically issuing orders, his face pale with shock. We're pulling back to the northern bunker, he shouted. If they breach again, we'll make our last stand there. Hayes grabbed him by the arm. We need to know who sold us out. There's no way they knew our mission details unless someone on the inside leaked them. The colonel's eyes flicked nervously to the side, just for a split second, but it was enough to set my instincts screaming. Hayes caught it too. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Sir, who have you been talking to? Before the colonel could answer, a shot rang out and he collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. I spun, weapon raised, just in time to see a shadowy figure disappearing through the tent flap. Traitor. Hayes roared, sprinting after the fleeing figure. Daniels and I followed, our boots pounding the dirt. The chase led us through the burning wreckage of the base, past wounded soldiers and shattered defenses. Ahead, the traitor dove into a waiting jeep and gunned the engine. Without hesitation, Hayes leaped onto the vehicle's side, grappling with the driver as it careened wildly across the compound. I raised my rifle, but there was no clear shot. The jeep roared toward the open desert, Hayes clinging desperately to the side. Jax, he shouted, his voice barely audible over the engine's roar. Take him down before he gets away. My heart pounded as I raised my weapon, every muscle straining with focus. One shot. That was all I had. I exhaled slowly, blocked out the chaos, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder, slicing through the night and striking the jeep's rear tire with perfect precision. The vehicle swerved violently, skidding out of control as sparks flew from the rim. Hayes clung to the side for dear life while the traitor behind the wheel fought desperately to regain control. The jeep fishtailed across the dirt, then flipped end over end, crashing in a deafening explosion of metal and fire. I sprinted forward with Daniels right behind me, my lungs burning and my rifle raised. The wreckage smoked ahead, the acrid stench of burning fuel stinging my nostrils. Hayes stumbled out of the wreck, coughing, his uniform torn and blood smeared across his forehead, but alive. The traitor wasn't so lucky, or maybe he was too lucky. He was already crawling away from the flames, a pistol clutched in his trembling hand, his face twisted in desperation. Stop! I yelled, training my rifle on him. But instead of surrendering, he spun and fired wildly. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing my shoulder and tearing through my vest. I dove to the side and returned fire, forcing him to scramble behind a nearby boulder. Hayes was already moving, drawing his sidearm and advancing with cold, controlled precision. Daniels flanked left, limping slightly from his earlier wound but refusing to slow down. The traitor popped up to fire again and Hayes didn't hesitate. 2 precise shots cracked through the night, striking the man in the chest. He collapsed backward, his pistol clattering to the dirt. I rushed to his side, adrenaline surging. Who are you working for? I demanded, my voice a growl. Blood bubbled at his lips as he coughed, eyes glassy with pain but still burning with defiance. You'll never stop it, he rasped. They're already coming. Hayes crouched beside him, his voice icy calm. Oh, who gave you the intel? The man laughed weakly, a chilling sound. You think this was about your mission? This was just the beginning. His body went limp before he could say more, his last breath rattling into the darkness. I stared at the lifeless form, anger boiling inside me. Damn it. We needed answers. I slammed my fist into the dirt, but Hayes placed a steady hand on my shoulder. We'll get them, he said, his tone like steel. But right now we have to get back to the base before the next wave hits. Daniels, call it in. We need medevac and reinforcements. Daniels nodded, fumbling with his radio as we made our way back, the flickering fires casting long eerie shadows across the desert. When we returned to the base, the scene was even worse than before. The wounded were lined up outside the infirmary, medics scrambling to treat them under the pale glow of emergency lights. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the smell of blood and gunpowder. The survivors were exhausted, their faces hollow with shock, but there was no time to rest. Hayes stormed into the command tent, his voice cutting through the chaos. Status report. A young lieutenant, barely holding it together, snapped to attention. Enemy forces pulled back after the airstrike, sir. We estimate heavy casualties on their side, but they'll be back. Drones picked up multiple convoys, regrouping 20 clicks out. Hayes swore under his breath. How long until they hit us again? The lieutenant hesitated. 2 hours, maybe less. Hayes turned to me and Daniels. We're out of time. That traitor's death confirms what we already suspected. This wasn't a random attack. Someone out there has been pulling the strings and they're not done yet. If they take this base, they'll have access to everything. Intel, weapon caches, supply lines. We can't let that happen. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. So what's the plan? Hayes' eyes burned with determination. We don't wait for them to come to us. We hit them first. The room went silent. Daniels blinked in disbelief. You're talking about going on the offensive? With what forces, sir? Half our guys are wounded and the rest are running on fumes. Hayes gave a grim smile. We don't need numbers. We need precision. A small strike team can slip behind their lines, take out their command structure, and sow enough chaos to scatter their forces. Without leadership, they'll crumble. I felt the weight of his words settle over me. It was insane, a suicide mission, but it was also our only chance. Who's on the team? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Hayes looked at me, then Daniels. The three of us. And anyone else who's crazy enough to volunteer. Preparations were swift and brutal. We gathered explosives, silenced weapons, and whatever supplies we could scrounge. As we geared up, Daniels caught my eye. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. You know this is probably the end, right? He said quietly. I gave a tight nod. Probably. But if we don't do this, everyone here dies. At least this way we have a shot. Before we left, Hayes addressed the remaining defenders. Hold the line no matter what. Buy us time. If we succeed, you'll see the enemy scatter. If we fail, his voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. No one in that base expected to see us return. We slipped out under cover of darkness, moving like shadows across the jagged terrain. Hayes led the way, every step silent and deliberate. The enemy camp loomed ahead, its perimeter lit by flickering torches and the glow of campfires. Through my scope, I counted at least 100 fighters, maybe more. Trucks and armored vehicles were scattered throughout, and at the center stood a large, fortified tent, the command post. Hayes crouched beside us, whispering his plan. We plant charges on the vehicles first. When they go up, it'll create confusion. Then we hit the command tent, grab any intel we can, and get out before they know what hit them. Daniels and I nodded, our hearts pounding. This was it, the moment everything came down to. Moving like ghosts, we crept into the camp. My breath caught as I slid past a dozing guard, so close I could hear him snoring. One by one, we planted explosives on the vehicles, each click of the detonator sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my veins. When the last charge was set, we regrouped near the command tent. Hayes gave the signal and I pressed the trigger. The night exploded in fire and chaos. Vehicles erupted in towering flames, shockwaves rippling through the camp as enemy fighters screamed and scrambled. Hayes didn't hesitate. He charged forward, tearing open the command tent flap and cutting down the guards inside with ruthless efficiency. Daniels and I followed, weapons ready. Inside, maps and documents were spread across a massive table, along with satellite phones and laptops. Hayes grabbed everything he could carry while I covered the entrance. We've got what we need, he shouted. Now move. But the enemy was faster than we expected. Fighters poured into the tent from every direction, their gunfire deafening. Daniels went down with a cry, clutching his leg. I dragged him behind cover, firing wildly to keep the enemy back. Hayes tossed me a pack of grenades. We can't hold them. Blow the tent and run. With trembling hands, I yanked the pins and hurled the grenades. The tent erupted in a massive explosion, fire and smoke engulfing everything. We bolted through the chaos, dragging Daniels between us, bullets snapping past our ears. The camp was in total disarray, enemy fighters shouting in confusion as the remaining vehicles burned. We made it to the edge of the camp just as enemy reinforcements surged in. Hayes turned, covering our retreat with precise bursts of fire. "Go," he roared. "Get him to safety." I didn't want to leave him, but there was no time to argue. Daniels and I stumbled into the darkness, the camp shrinking behind us. As we ran, the ground shook with distant explosions, the final sign that the enemy's chain of command had been shattered. For the first time all night, hope flickered in my chest. But it was fragile, and I knew the fight was far from over. When we finally collapsed behind a rocky outcrop, gasping for breath, Daniels looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Did we do it?" he asked. I stared back at the distant inferno, then at Hayes, who was staggering toward us, his rifle smoking and his face set like stone. "For now," I said, my voice hoarse. "But this war is just getting started." The desert night was alive with chaos, the glow of the burning enemy camp painting the horizon in shades of orange and crimson. Hayes stumbled toward us, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, but his expression was hard, unyielding. Daniels lay slumped against a rock, his leg bleeding heavily, his face pale from shock and pain. I crouched beside him, ripping open my med kit and pressing gauze to the wound. "Stay with me, Daniels," I said through gritted teeth, my voice trembling from exhaustion. "We're almost out of this." Daniels managed a weak smirk. "You keep saying that," he whispered, "but somehow it just keeps getting worse." Hayes dropped beside us, his gaze sweeping the darkness behind us. "They're regrouping," he said sharply. "That camp won't stay scattered for long. We need to move before they lock onto our position." My heart was still hammering from the raid, adrenaline surging through my veins like fire. The images of the chaos we'd unleashed in the camp were burned into my mind, the explosions tearing through vehicles, the panicked shouts of enemy fighters, the command tent erupting into a ball of flames. We had succeeded in crippling their leadership, but it had come at a cost. Daniels was badly hurt, we were low on ammo, and Hayes was running on sheer willpower. I wasn't much better, my muscles screaming with fatigue, my throat raw from the dust and smoke. Still, there was no time to rest. The enemy would be hunting us now, enraged and desperate for revenge. Hayes knelt beside Daniels, his hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion in his body. "We've got one shot at making it out of here alive," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Extraction is on the north ridge, 3 clicks away. If we can get there, the birds will pick us up. But if we stay here, they'll surround us and finish the job." I glanced toward the north, my stomach sinking. The terrain between us and the ridge was open, jagged, and treacherous, perfect for an ambush. "They'll see us coming a mile away," I said. Hayes' jaw tightened. "That's why we don't stop moving. We keep low, stay fast, and hit back hard if they get in our way." "Understood." I nodded, even as dread coiled in my gut. Daniels groaned as we hauled him to his feet, his arms slung over my shoulders. Every step was agony for him, and I could feel his weight dragging me down, but I refused to let him fall. Hayes took point, his silhouette blending with the darkness as he led us through the shattered landscape. The night was eerily quiet now, the distant crackle of flames the only sound. It was the kind of silence that screamed of danger, the calm before the storm. We moved as quickly as we could, weaving between rocks and craters left by the earlier battle. My senses were on high alert, every shadow seeming to shift, every gust of wind sounding like footsteps. Hayes suddenly froze, raising a clenched fist. I dropped to one knee, heart pounding, and scanned the area. Through the darkness, I spotted movement, several enemy fighters creeping along a ridge ahead, their rifles glinting faintly under the moonlight. They hadn't seen us yet, but they were blocking our path. Hayes crawled back to me, his eyes cold and calculating. "We take them out quietly," he whispered. "No gunfire unless absolutely necessary." I nodded, setting Daniels gently against a rock. He clenched his jaw, understanding that he'd have to wait there until we cleared the way. Hayes and I moved like shadows, every step silent, every breath controlled. I crept up behind one enemy soldier, my combat knife already in hand. With one swift motion, I silenced him, lowering his body quietly to the ground. Hayes struck with equal precision, the two of us cutting through their ranks before they could raise the alarm. But just as I thought we'd succeeded, one fighter spun and saw us. His shout split the night like a gunshot. Hayes lunged forward, tackling him, but it was too late. The alarm had been raised. More enemies swarmed over the ridge, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Move!" Hayes bellowed, grabbing my arm and dragging me back toward Daniels. Bullets ripped through the air as we sprinted, the ground exploding around us. I fired blindly over my shoulder, just trying to buy us time. Daniels struggled to his feet as we reached him, sheer determination etched on his face. "Go," he shouted. "I'll cover you." Hayes snarled, "Not a chance. We're all getting out of here." With that, he hoisted Daniels onto his back like he weighed nothing and kept running. I laid down suppressive fire, my rifle kicking against my shoulder as we fled into the darkness. The enemy chased us relentlessly, their shouts growing louder, their gunfire more accurate. Up ahead, the terrain opened into a wide, rocky plain. There was no cover, nowhere to hide. My stomach twisted as I realized we'd be sitting ducks out there. Hayes seemed to have the same thought because he suddenly veered toward a cluster of jagged boulders. "We make our stand here," he roared. We dove behind the rocks just as bullets slammed into the stone, showering us with shards. My ammo was nearly gone. I had one full magazine left, maybe two if I stretched it. Hayes handed me a grenade, his face grim. "When they get close, we hit them with everything we've got. No holding back." The enemy charged, their silhouettes breaking through the smoke and dust. I opened fire, every shot deliberate, every target falling with brutal efficiency. Hayes fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death as he shielded Daniels with his own body. Grenades exploded, the blast throwing enemies into the air like rag dolls. Still they kept coming wave after wave. My rifle clicked empty and I switched to my sidearm, my hands shaking from exhaustion. Just when it seemed like we were about to be overrun, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors filled the air. I looked up to see two Black Hawks streaking toward us, their side gunners opening fire. The enemy scattered under the onslaught, their lines breaking as explosions ripped through their ranks. "Signal them," Hayes shouted, tossing me a flare. I yanked it open and waved it wildly, the red smoke cutting through the chaos. The Black Hawks descended, their rotors kicking up clouds of dust. Hayes lifted Daniels into the nearest helicopter, then turned back to cover me. "Go, Jax," he yelled. I sprinted toward the bird, bullets snapping past me. As I leaped inside, I turned to see Hayes still firing, his silhouette framed against the burning horizon. For a terrifying moment I thought he wouldn't make it, but then he dove into the helicopter, landing hard beside me. The pilot didn't wait. The Black Hawk surged upward, the ground dropping away beneath us. Through the open doors, I watched as the battlefield receded, the enemy forces scattering like ants. Daniels lay unconscious, his chest rising and falling weakly. Hayes sat slumped beside him, his face etched with exhaustion but alive. As we flew toward safety, Hayes handed me a blood-stained folder, the intel we'd grabbed from the enemy camp. "This," he said hoarsely, "is why they came after us. There's a name in here, a shadow pulling the strings. Someone powerful enough to fund an army and set us up to die." I flipped through the documents, my heart sinking as I read the name. It was someone high up, someone we'd trusted. This goes all the way to the top," I whispered. Hayes nodded grimly. "This war isn't over, Jax. Tonight was just the opening move." The helicopter flew into the rising dawn, the first light of day breaking over the horizon. Below us, the enemy base burned, but in my gut, I knew this victory was temporary. The traitors' network was still out there, vast and dangerous, and we had just painted a target on our backs. As I stared at the blood-stained folder, one thought burned in my mind: whatever it took, we would hunt them down. We had survived the ambush, the battle, and the betrayal, but the fight was far from finished. And this time we weren't just fighting for survival, we were fighting for the truth, and for every soldier who hadn't made it out of that valley alive. The end.